glad I came and looked at that. So we've got the rational criminal. What does it mean to be rational?
So we kind of have the same thought process.
Okay, so and what about that thought process makes it rational? Because we all know we've been irrational ourselves at different points in our life. We've seen other people be maybe more irrational at times than others. So what does that mean, Jonathan?
Just like realistic.
Okay, realistic. What else could you add on?
Just the most reasonable choice under like given circumstances.
Okay, reasonable choice. What would make a choice reasonable? Carlos. Okay, you've evaluated your opportunity cost. So you got cost over here of an action. And then you've got benefits of an action. And what makes it rational? You compare them and the benefits outweigh the cost, you do it. If the costs outweigh the benefit, you don't, right? So that's kind of rationality in a nutshell in terms of what we're thinking here with the for the criminal as well as all people. So we don't treat politicians differently in econ class. We think that they're self-interested, pursuing their own self-interest and are rational about it, which might mean getting bribes or doing things, saying one thing outside their mouth and doing others. Same thing with criminals now. We're going to think about the criminal being rational, even though maybe it's kind of common to think, oh, well, they're not rational, they're irrational, they're breaking the law. Well, maybe there's some other reasons. Maybe we can make predictions about the criminal and their behavior based on thinking about marginal benefits and marginal cost. Okay, so we've got crime fighting and increasing returns. So this is kind of a carrot and stick. Which one of these is the carrot and which one's the stick? For incentives. You guys have heard of that? Use a carrot or use a stick for incentives?
So school is carrot.
The school would be the carrot. Prison, yeah, you kind of got somebody maybe holding a stick and hurting somebody. So, the use of fear can be an incentive. Has that been a motivating factor in your life sometimes, that you were fearful of something happening? Sure, right? So there's going to be a penalty, is the idea of creating an incentive through a stick. And a carrot is putting some sort of benefit to change your behavior in some way. So carrot and stick type concepts is what we'll look at a little bit here with the rational criminal. So here's some data from 1960s, kind of interesting to look at how this has changed over time. So we got the number of crimes per 100,000 people. So how often does murder happen? 5 murders per 100,000 people. So that is like what percent? 0.0100. 10% murders, 10%, this is the way my brain always works, that's why I sometimes share it with you guys. 10% murder rate would be how many?
1,000.
1,000? 10%? 10,000. 10%? 100,000, 10,000? So 1% is 1,000, and we're at 5. So it's pretty small. All right, Jonathan.
Are these numbers the killer counted as the murderer, or like victims?
The victim. Yep. So we're thinking about the victim, the number of murders went up. We had some problems, but then notice 2003 we're back down to some old levels in terms of murder. So we got that going for us. How are we doing on rape? Not too great, we're substantially still higher than where we were. Now, culturally, what do you think's going on with the rape statistic in 1960 compared to 2020 or in the 2000s?
It wasn't considered.
I don't know if it wasn't considered rape, but what's been a growing thing that has happened? Speaking out, yeah. So how many rapes went unreported in 1960? Probably a ton, right? And so as women have been, more confident in coming forward, there was probably a lot of unreported rapes going on. So I doubt it was that low, and all of a sudden, men have gotten worse over time, but that might be true too. I'm just saying that might not be all of the story. Andrew.
Would you also say that it's like upgrading technology, like movies or like the invention of your kids?
Absolutely, yeah. So technological innovation can impact these numbers as well. So robbery, what's the difference between robbery and burglary?
Robbery's like businesses, burglary's like homes.
Okay, burglary, so you're actually going in the home. How about larceny? Is anybody up on their crimes here? Larceny versus burglary.
Is that destruction of?
You're just stealing somebody's property. So here you've entered their house and you may or may not have stolen something, but you had intent to steal. Larceny is the theft. Grand larceny, isn't that one of the video games of auto theft?
Grand Theft
101
Auto.
or what is it? Grand Theft Auto, yeah. So that's like, I think grand larceny is when you the amount of property that you stole is high, like if you're a diamond thief or something. So anyway, this kind of gives us the statistics. It's normalized to 100,000 people. So we see some stuff like here, 1970 versus 2003. Some are up, some are down. Just kind of interesting to think about the different types of crimes that happen out there. Did I see another hand up or question or comment? So the first part of this chapter just kind of goes through that. So this side is with crimes for the person. So this is more of property theft. So does it involve people? We've got robbery and assault. So if we're hitting somebody, maybe they don't get hurt, or we've shook them up, or we've touched them somehow. What does it look like for who's hurting who in terms of income? Rich people taking from poor people taking from rich people taking from poor people, or rich people taking from rich people?
Or people taking from rich people.
That's still victims, isn't it?
Yeah, this is victims. Yep, this is victimization rates.
So rich taking from
And this is per thousand. So who gets hit the hardest here?
poor taking from poor.
The poor, yeah. And you know, is it likely the poor taking from the poor? We don't know. But probably if you're rich, you're not really stealing, or a higher income individual. So we see a lot of, poor versus poor in terms of income levels. Low income with low income with higher rates there. And then we've got different rates depending if we're in the city versus suburbia or out in the rural area. So the probability of getting hit there. Different regions across the United States, we can have different crime rates, different cultures, different policies, different police rates, right? And then here's the property thefts, just because it's a lot to look at. So motor vehicle theft, a little bit bigger in the big city. All right, so that's just to kind of give you a little feel about some of the stuff that we're looking at in the chapter. There's a few more here to go too. This is a little more recent data from 2011. That last one I think was 2003. So robbery, burglary, motor vehicle theft. So this is 6 per 1,000 over the course of a year. And then less than 250 bucks, more than 250 bucks. So victimization rates per 1,000. So crime on property crime has gone down. Now this one I think especially, Andrew, with your point that we have better surveillance, cameras, alarms, right? All of those innovations have probably helped on the property side of life. And violent crimes were really high in the 90s. We had some issues, and then it's kind of leveled off here in the 2000s.
Why do you think that is?
Oh, I think part of it could be with innovation as well. But here in the 90s, you guys might remember the Freakonomics, those of you who had intermediate class, that abortion was 18 years earlier, and so we had high rates. But there was also a lot of effort to increase police forces and other things during that time as well. So definitely some changes over time. I think there was a response here that it was too high. And we've changed some things over time. Of course, that's a hot debate right now, right? With do we have too many people in prison? People, we always hear stories of people wrongfully accused that have been in there with new DNA techniques. So economists go in and estimate some costs. So the victim cost, $91 billion. Private prevention measures. So you buying a security system, that costs money, right? That's less beer and chicken wings that you can buy. Criminal justice system, what does it take to keep people behind bars? That costs money. And then how about the people who are behind bars? They could be working, so there's lost pay for them. So we got a number of different costs around the board to consider. All right, so we're going to take a little deeper dive into making predictions off the rational criminal. So suppose you double park somewhere and you've got a chance of gaining $44, or you might get a ticket and it's going to cost you $36. Are you going to do it? What would you guys do? Is that worth the risk?
Depends on
You
how
got a 50-50 shot, so basically you're pulling up, you're like, oh, maybe we've all done this in some different ways, right? Oh, there's probably no cops around. I'm only gonna be in there for 5 minutes. I'm gonna park my car here. Is it worth the risk? Who would take the risk of that? So we kind of have to start to think balancing. If we do an expected value, if we put on our expected value hat, is it worth taking the risk? Yeah, so the expected payoff, 50% chance of getting 44 is 22. 50% chance of losing 36 is negative 18. We're still up 4. But that's if we are risk neutral. But people generally tend to be risk averse, and so they wouldn't take that bet typically, right? So we kind of think about some of the risk aversion. And then we'll also bring in this idea of anguish. Oh, I really hate myself, I double parked, and you're beating yourself up, so there's a utility drop for you, perhaps as well. Okay, so here's how we set this thing up. We've got uncertain outcomes. So let R1 and R2 be the values that we might get in each state of nature. So usually this is going to mean I steal somebody's stuff and I get $120 worth of gain because I didn't get caught. But I lose and I get caught and there's a penalty or some sort of negative value for getting caught, so 25. And then I have a 3/5 probability of getting the loot, the 120, and a 2/5 probability of getting the negative 25. All right, so what is my expected value? Yeah, in your notebooks, I see some of you doing it. So set up the problem first. So what would be the expected payoff if we have a chance of getting 120 with 3/5 probability and a negative 25 with 2/5 probability? And you can pull out your phone as a calculator if you want, because I think it's good practice, or a real calculator if you got it. Put your phone on airplane mode. Don't worry about this part at this point. As soon as you get an answer, spit it out. So for the final exam, you definitely should be able to lay this thing out. What did you get?
62.
62 bucks. Any other answers?
That's right.
Is that right? Other people got that? So 62 bucks. All right, so then let's bring this little thing into play here. So if you have loss aversion, so that is one of our behavioral economics things. It means that a loss hurts you more than a gain. So the example I like to use is peanuts on an airplane. So if this is the first time you've ever flown in an airplane and somebody gives you a bag of peanuts, right? You're like, oh, that's kind of nice. That's a nice little perk that I get from getting a bag of peanuts, right? When I fly on the airplane. That's one scenario, right? How do you value those peanuts? You're like, oh, that's kind of a nice little thing. But now you've flown for like 5 years, and you know that you always get a bag of peanuts as part of your flying experience. But today they come on the intercom and they say, sorry, due to budget cuts, no peanuts today. You're pissed off, right? What do you mean you can't give me that little bag of peanuts, right? So losing a bag of peanuts hurts you more in terms of utility than gaining a bag of peanuts, is what they find in experimental economics. All right, and maybe you can relate to that too. So part of what we're going to model here is that when you lose something, it hurts you more if you lose $25 versus gaining $25. There's a weight in there that impacts you a little bit more on utility. All right, we'll circle back to that one too. So there's our $62 that you guys laid out. And so we're going to assume that a $1 loss is twice the pleasure of a $1 gain. So to measure the impact of a loss in dollar terms, we're going to take 2 times the amount that a gain would be. So it's in my peanut example, a loss hurts you 2 bags of peanuts versus 1 bag of peanut. And so that would be our formula for that. So here's the horizontal axis measuring these dollars. If I steal and I don't get caught, I get 360 units of satisfaction. If I do nothing, I get nothing. But if I lose money, I get 150 negative units of satisfaction. Okay? So it's not linear, right? So if it was always dollar for dollar, or happiness for happiness, it would be a straight line, but it's not. The loss hurts you at twice the rate. So with 250, of course, if we were thinking basically the slope of this line here, 120 over 120, up 360, so my rise over my run is what? 3. So the slope of this is 3, and then this one, down 25, what's the slope here? 6. So down 25 over, over 25, down 150. Okay, so that's the setup. So if you calculate now the expected payoff in terms of utility, calculate that one now on your paper, and this would be good to have in your notes. The expected payoff was 62, but what's the expected utility of the gamble of stealing? So the expected utility, you've got 3/5 of a chance of getting what, plus 2/5 of a chance of getting what? As soon as you get an answer, shout it out. 156. So we're now on the vertical axis, right? And so it's basically saying I had a 3/5 chance of getting 120, which means I have a 3/5 chance of getting 360 units of satisfaction. Plus, I had a 2/5 chance of losing 25, but that translates into 150 of negative utility. And so my utility number is a positive 156. Okay, any questions so far?
Why is it 360? Or is that just given?
It was just given,
Okay.
yeah. Yep, the 360 was just the way this person's utility function was working. Anything else? Okay. How much money with certainty would it take to keep Bart from committing the crime? How much money would it take to keep Bart from committing the crime? How much money would it take to keep bad boy Bart from committing the crime? Jonathan?
52.
52.
That he's indifferent of doing the crime and not doing it.
Yeah. So remember, with the crime, we may get 120, we may lose. How does that affect my happiness? That means I have an expected happiness level that's uncertain at 156. Well, if somebody would offer me $52, I would be at the same level of happiness as before. So $52 is the certainty equivalent associated with 156 units of happiness. So remember, the 156 is uncertain when we commit the crime. So if we could offer a certainty equivalent of 52, they wouldn't do it. Questions on that? Yeah.
Like if we didn't have the 52, how you get it?
If we didn't have the 52 here, there'd be a function. So you could, we know that this is 156. So how would we calculate this number? What's the slope of this line? 3. So up 156 over 3, which is 52, right? So rise over run, 52 times 3 is 156. And yes, you'll probably have a homework problem or a test problem that you would have to calculate 52. Okay, anything else? Okay, so there's our certainty equivalent. So a payment of 52 gives that amount and would make that gamble not worth it, especially when we think about risk aversion. So now this thing is a little bit different. How many criminals are we going to have out there? How many criminals are we going to have out in our community? So we've got 200 people, which is just kind of picked out of the air, and there's a wage that's lawful. So we can organize people by their ability to earn a lawful wage. So some of those high wage people would never even think of committing the crime, right? So the crime had an expected payoff of the 52 with the certainty equivalent. So we're trying to think of where that level that would make them indifferent between it. So these people over here on this side have a lawful wage that's greater than what they would get with the certainty equivalent with crime. And so they're like, no problem, right? I'm gonna be a lawful citizen. And this person right at the margin here is indifferent between the lawful wage and the certainty equivalent, but they're not gonna flip a coin because they're likely risk averse especially, they would be lawful as well. So then we've got these folks over here. So these folks over here have a lawful wage that's less than the gamble associated with committing the crime. And so these are our criminals over here. All right, so part of the assumptions of this thing is just saying there's a rate of, at $16, there's 32 people that would be earning the $16. And so we've just got this relationship that's part of the assumptions of that's what the lawful wage looks like. Okay, so that's just kind of the setup of thinking about how many people we might have. So what real world, real people considerations would cause a person to not commit a crime if he or she made less than 52? So let's kind of get away from the economic model to think about what real world, real people would still maybe be lawful.
Principles?
Jonathan?
They've got too much to lose.
Too much to lose, okay, in terms of,
Like you lose your job or something if you get caught, kind of thing.
okay. Carlos, you got something?
I see like the principles of the person.
Oh, principles, like their morals and stuff, okay.
Yeah, I was
Is
gonna
that what
say
you're thinking too?
moral preference with utility.
Okay.
Use.
Yeah, so a little bit of that anguish cost could play into it. So maybe those are some considerations that we'd have with real world people that we could even try to model into it. So now how can we make predictions? So this is our antisocial acts, our anguish cost. Give this a read. So what do you think would happen with the number of criminals if there is this internal morality or your principles, the anguish cost? What's going to happen, Jacob? Go down. All right, so we're basically lowering that certainty equivalent. Let's see, I think that's what I got. Oops, sorry. Did I just go up? That was weird. Okay. So if this thing goes, you're saying this would go down? What would be happening over here? If we had some sort of anguish cost.
It'd be steeper.
Yeah, utility would go
Utility
down.
get a little steeper?
Decrease steeper, yeah.
So this way?
Yeah.
Alright, anything down here?
That would get a lot steeper because you're caught.
Oh, that's what I meant to say. Decrease
So
steeper.
this one gets
That's
steeper.
what I was trying to. Yeah.
So this one drags down the negative 50, so if that gets higher, then this number is going to get lower. So if this number gets lower, then that's associated with a lower certainty equivalent, which brings this thing's going to come down, right? And then the number of criminals is going to fall. Okay, so that's the thought process with adding in some anguish cost. So does this stuff really work out in the real world? So do we really see rates go down when lawful wages go up? What does this study say? Yes or no?
Yes.
Yes. So interpreting these elasticities, remember we can drop them over 1, or we make it slide the decimal place over 1 and put it over 10 is what we're doing here. A 10% increase in the wages of low, no-skill workers decreases over time. We get the 10 to 20% type of change. And then what about educating people? Same thing. So, have you guys heard of No Child Left Behind? Is that a good policy? No child left behind. Jameson?
I get like what they're trying to get, but at the same time you can't like force like a kid or someone to get educated or go get a job if they don't want to.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think it's been a failure. I think we should leave some kids behind. Is this being recorded? So, what do I mean by that? I just mean that what actually has happened, which sounds good, no kid left behind, if it would have been implemented correctly, I think it has a lot of merit. But we're dealing with real world human beings. And so if teachers get penalized for holding kids back, what is the teacher likely to do? Pass them along, right? And so really, when we make a statement like this, it's like we're talking like, no, they're really getting educated. They're really understanding and knowing some stuff. They're not just being pushed along through the system. And so that's would be my beef with No Child Left Behind, is that we continue to kind of, in an effort to see what No Child Left Behind means, did some things that put kids through the system that probably should have been held back, right? And it's not like we're leaving them behind. We're just saying, no, you didn't learn the stuff you needed to stay in this grade. But if the teacher gets penalized for not having a good passing rate or something, then the teacher all of a sudden has incentive to lower the bar, right? Teach to the test. I know how we can do it. We can just do standardized tests. Well, then the teachers have incentive to teach whatever that test is, not really teach maybe the things that they're passionate about. And then to me, it's just this downward spiral. I don't know about you, but I'm about ready to take K through 12 education and pretty much throw it out the window and start from scratch would be the Russ McCullough line of thinking on that. But I don't want to spend too much time. We got to get back to crime here. So unfortunately, there's a chapter in the book on education that's interesting too, but didn't have time to hit that one in detail. Okay, so institutionalization rates. Who's getting thrown in jail? High school dropouts, high school grads, some college graduates. So we see that data, but again, we can't just fake our way into getting a high school graduate. It really needs to have some mustard behind it. But there's some data from the past on that. So how does an increase in the probability of being caught and penalized affect the certainty equivalent? An increase in the probability of being caught, and I'm going to randomly select somebody that I haven't heard from yet. So, Jonathan, how about a number between 3 and 8?
4.
4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Gabe, you are a lucky contestant. So, Gabe, how does an increase in the probability of being caught and penalized affect the certainty equivalent? So, our example here, remember, we have the probability of being caught was the 3/5 and 2/5. So, we had a 2/5 chance of losing the 25, which meant we had a 2/5 chance of getting the 150. And so if the probability of being caught and penalized is increased, what's going to happen to the certainty equivalent? Decrease. Okay. So what's going to happen to the expected utility when we change this thing around? And I'm just opening it up to anybody here.
It's all going to decrease.
So these stay the same, right? But the probabilities change. And so if we go 50-50, for instance, 50-50, then we're going to have a shifting here of, oh wait, I didn't want to go 50-50, did I? I wanted to go 3/5, 2/5. If we're increasing the probability of being caught, if we reverse those, then this number's gonna get smaller, right? And then that's going to kind of have the effect of that being smaller, and then the certainty equivalent. And that is one way that we can address crime. So what if the probability of success decreases from 3/5 to 1/5? So the probability of being penalized goes from 2/5 to 1/2. So why don't you guys do it on your calculator? Get comfortable with it. So we've got a 50-50 now.
$105.
105. Everybody get that? So it's up here, the answer's up here, but you're gonna basically just be replacing this with 50-50 and get the 105. And so Carlos, whoa! How do we get that number? We'll see if he
35.
35, yes, right? So using that 3-to-1 slope ratio gives us 35. All right, and then of course, what's happening over in this picture? We go from 52 down to 35, we have less criminals. So how do we increase the probability of being caught? Police force, better security, better technology maybe with cameras. So you guys, has anybody gotten a ticket from a automatic camera that's taking pictures of your speed? You got one?
K-tag.
Where'd you get? Oh, K-tag. Do they do it for K-tag?
Yeah.
Yeah, I went.
Oh, coming through when you're supposed to slow down
I went to
to
pick someone
30.
up from the airport, and they caught me and billed me like
Wow.
$24.
Wow. Okay. Wow, I didn't know that. I know I've gone. They must give you a deep. How fast were you going? Do you know? Or did
Well,
they just
it wasn't
give you-
speeding. It was just
Oh.
for not having a K-tag.
Oh, for not having a K-tag.
Yeah.
Oh, okay,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Gotcha. Has anybody gotten an actual speeding ticket from the cameras? Was that back in Colombia? Yeah, because I think they've been, for the most part, poo-pooed in the United States. Has anybody gotten one? I think they've tried it in different municipalities. You got one, Julian?
Well, San Antonio, I got a ticket up for light for going on yellow.
On yellow, okay, or it was probably red.
It was definitely yellow.
No, that flashing.
You can be in the intersection when it's yellow, but it probably turned red maybe while you were in the intersection. I don't know how they would determine it, but I do remember from driver's ed school that it is, you can be in the intersection when it's yellow, but it's, with caution. But did I see somebody else's hand up? Andrew, you got?
I got caught going through a red light. I mean, it was
Through a red light.
It didn't get much redder than that, and my ticket was like 210.
Well, I've noticed in a lot of foreign countries that I've visited, there's a lot more camera surveillance. So they do it. I remember when I went to Lithuania too, I asked the guy, they had a little sign that basically said like a picture camera with speed, and I'm like, do they really send you a ticket? He's like, oh yeah, I've got a bunch of them. That they'll just automatically send you a ticket, reading your license plate or whatever device they have. So I think Americans have tried to poo-poo that, but probably not for long. We have other devices. So all of that stuff might be able to help. Okay, so what are some elasticities? What is the interpretation of this? Why don't you guys write the interpretation in your notes of this one? I'll come around the room. So the elasticity of crime to the probability of imprisonment. Write out the interpretation. Always a good chance this could be on your final exam here. Interpreting elasticities. too much writing going on. Need a nudge?
Yeah.
So the elasticity is always the ratio of two percentage changes, right?
Yeah.
And so the first one listed is what goes on top. So crime's on top, percentage of crime divided by the percentage of imprisonment, probability of imprisonment. Write those two things down.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, once you got that, and then you can put any number over 1. So then, what was our number again, Jonathan? 4?
Yes.
So 1, 2, 3, 4. Andrew, we heard from you. Tyler, I don't think we've heard from you, if I remember right. So,
Yeah, that's it.
Tyler, what is the interpretation?
A 1% increase in the probability of imprisonment leads to a 0.3% increase in decrease. Sorry.
Decrease, yeah. Yeah, that negative sign needs to play in there. So, yeah, you got it. So put this over 1. A 1% increase in the probability of imprisonment leads to a 0.3% decrease in crime. So that's what some studies have found. And then we've got arrest ratio. So how many people are being arrested? So 1% increase in the arrest ratio leads to a 0.3% decrease in crime. Carlos?
You say 0.2%, it's 0.2%?
It's 0.3%.
30%?
It's not 30%. Yeah, this has always been 0.3, so it's 0.3 of a percent. Now you can do, so what Tyler did and kind of normal, a 1%, an increase of 1% in the probability leads to a decrease in 0.3%. Or, like we did in that other one, you can change this to a 10 and then change this to a 3, right, by moving that over. So you could interpret it this way. Sometimes it just feels nicer to say a 10% change or whatever, so the interpretation's kind of similar, but usually in economics class we like to keep the changes pretty small, but you can, for interpretation purposes, that might be easier to explain to somebody. And then how about putting more police officers in your community here in Ottawa? Well, a 1% increase in the number of officers will lead to a 0.4% decrease in crime. Yeah,
Are these real numbers?
these are real numbers.
Well, if you look at it like, if there's a 100% chance of getting caught, then crime only goes down 30%.
Well, yeah, you can't go too big of changes. So if it's, whenever we're doing something like this, let's just say, well, let's just say it this way. Let me see if I can pull this out of my butt here quickly. So the number of police. And this is crimes. What does this function look like? If we have 0 police, do we have a lot of crime or a little crime? A lot of crime, potentially. So there's a lot. Now, as we add police, crime goes up or down? Down. Does it go down like this? Does it go down like this? Does it go down like this?
I think it's a straight line.
So I add 1 officer. Does that have a big effect on crime?
Oh, it's gonna be the bottom one.
Or does 1 officer just have a little effect? So then if I have 10 officers and I'm thinking about the 11th officer, what is the incremental effect on crime? Is it this or is it this? So as we add here, the 12th officer, tell me what's going on here. Crime is being dramatically reduced with the, I already have 11 officers and now I have 12. The 12th officer had a bigger impact on crime than the 11th officer? Does that sound right?
There's just more people out there.
Yeah. Well, we're holding the number of people, I don't know if you meant officers or
the
not.
number of policemen up, that way there's more people to cover more areas, so you'll see a dramatic decrease in crime
So-
just because of more presence.
So again, I think we talked about this before. How many officers were we guessing there are in Ottawa? Especially Lawson, he's kind of a local, but 20 or something?
20, yeah.
So if I go from 20 to 30, is crime gonna go down?
Yeah.
Probably. If I go from 30 to 40, is crime gonna go down further?
At a decreasing rate.
At a decreasing rate. Which one's decreasing right here?
Top one.
Top one?
No.
Bottom one.
Oh.
So I know sometimes it can be a little your brain just kind of goes a different way. But if we're thinking about the number of police at the margin and here's crime, this line says 1 officer, 2 officers, 3 officers, 4 officers. By the way, maybe there's this function could be funky or something here, but eventually it looks like this. And this is just the law of diminishing returns to additional officers, right? There's going to be less and less crime that's going to be gained, the number of crimes being done. And then eventually, each officer is probably not reducing crime at all, right? Let's put 1,000 officers in Ottawa. Better yet, let's put 10,000 officers. You know what I mean? What is the value of the 10,000th officer? Nothing. They're not doing anything at that point, right? In terms of benefit, incrementally. Okay, so how does an increase in the crime penalty decrease the number of criminals? So let's say it goes from 25 to 35. Go ahead and calculate that one. So we'll keep it at the 2/5, 3/5, or what we originally started with, or 3/5, 2/5 chance of getting caught. But now we go to 35. We're going to really hit you with a big penalty. We're going to put, instead of 1 year in jail, you're going to get 3 years in jail or whatever. That's what we're doing with the penalty. As soon as you get an answer, let's shout it out. The answer's not up there this time, so you're going to have to.
132.
132? The other people get that one?
Yeah.
So 132, so this number up here changes and we get the utility changing. All right, and so then what's going to happen with certainty equivalent? What happens to certainty equivalent?
Goes down.
Goes down. I guess if you guys agree with 132, what does it go down to?
Did you get 132?
132. Did everybody get 132? I guess let's make sure everybody got 132. Jameson's saying no.
I haven't gotten it yet. I got a 75 for certain.
So at 35, what's this number?
Negative 210.
Negative
That's what I got.
210?
Yeah.
So down 10 more units. The slope here was 6. So 10 would be an extra 60. 150 plus 60 is 210. So negative 210 is our new number. So this thing turns into, instead of it being 150, it's negative 210. And then does that equal the 132?
Yes.
Okay. Is everybody cool with the 132 now? At 132, what is the certainty equivalent? 44. 132 divided by 3. So 130, we're just doing the rise over the run. The slope of this is 3, so 132 should get us in there with a new certainty equivalent. All right, so there's our 132. We're going to have less criminals, 140 at 44. It's not modeled here, but we just calculated the 44 off the 132. So an increase in the penalty leads to a decrease in the number of criminals. Julian.
Can you remember how'd you get the 132 one more time, please?
Yeah, that's right. Oops, I'm going the wrong way. So we did it up there a little bit, but we still have the 3/5 of getting 360 minus 2/5 of now getting 210, of losing 210.
How do you get into 210?
The 210 was from, instead of 25 gives you 150, and this is a slope of 6. Now we're going over 35 down to 210. Or you can think of it as we're adding $10 more on, which drops us an extra 60. 60 plus 150 equals 210.
You just take 35 times 6.
Yeah.
Yeah, 35 times 6 is just doing 35 times, then if this was down here, 35 times 6 is 210. Okay. So, give this a read here. Do longer prison terms. That increases the penalty, right? Longer prison terms. You smoke some weed, 10 years in prison. That's the way it goes. No inmate left behind. Our new mantra. Have you guys heard of this?
Was that actual a thing?
That's a real thing, yeah. They find with, you go to jail and you learn how to be a better criminal by sharing war stories with other people who have made mistakes. I would have got away with it if I would have just did it differently, right? And so you might learn how to be a better criminal. So longer prison terms aren't necessarily the best answer, I think, is what they've found over time. It's not quite that simple to pull it off because of these other factors that might be playing in. Whatever crime the person did at age even 50, if they're 20 years in prison as a 70-year-old in a wheelchair, I don't think we have to worry about that extra year of prison, the 20th year, doing much for the 70-year-old, right? Okay, any questions or comments on those? All right. So is the optimal level of crime 0? No, right? So good, that means you guys are sucking in some econ. We gotta get everything done, get them all done. So we have to think about the balance of the two. So we talked about victim cost early on, and we can estimate how much harm that's going to be. And then we're going to weigh it against the cost of putting the person in jail, right? And the benefits of how much time they're going to do. So it'll be kind of a standard supply and demand type analysis. So victim cost. So we might have 370 for larceny, 1,500 auto theft, armed robbery, assault being the worst in terms of victim cost. Are some crimes less expensive to experience than to prevent? That is our big question. So, $1,500 worth of benefit. And what does it cost us? Why is this going up?
It's going to cost more and more, trying to prevent more and more things.
Yeah. To prevent more things, we need more police. Now, the relationship might be like this, so then really that extra cop gets really expensive when they're basically not preventing much crime at all, right? But I still had to pay each cop $40,000 a year plus the cost of the car plus whatever, right? So if it's running $80,000 per year for an extra officer, is it worth it? So we've got our costs going up potentially the bigger the force gets, and so that lends itself to an optimal amount of crime either experienced or prevented, depending on how you look at it, right? So some things are more expensive than others. So robbery is 8.7 times the cost of burglary. So robbery is robbing somebody right on the spot. Burglary is breaking into their house where they're not necessarily there, right? And so that's the data they come up with that. So can we do some trade-offs? It's like dealing here. We're like, what's the ratio of trading burglaries for robberies? Can we make that trade-off? Is that possible as we think about the development of penalties and number of dollars spent in these areas? So should punishment fit the crime? Do we do that currently? Does the punishment fit the crime in general in the United States?
They try.
Do they try? Julian, you're saying no. Why do you say
I
no?
mean, I don't know. It's just I feel like some part of the state, some of the areas in the United States, you get in trouble for things that are legal in other places, and then you get sentenced.
Okay,
Yeah.
so that's a good point. So state by state it can be different, but within the state, within the jurisdiction which you're creating the crime, doing the crime, does murder carry a longer sentence than car theft? Yes, right? So in general, we do have policies to try to fit the crime, and that gets back philosophical. Back in the day, if you stole something 3,000 years ago with your right hand, what happened to your right hand? It was gone, right? So did the punishment fit the crime? Well, that sounds a little harsh, right? So whereas maybe some other things would be done differently. All right, so imagine that we've got burglars, robbers, and carpenters. And so we've got lawful work here of building stuff. And so that is our kind of our payoff here with each one is from our equilibrium starting place. So what happens if we increase the penalty for burglary? What happens if we increase the penalty for burglary? So we change policy and we make burglary more of a penalty for burglars.
Burglary curve is gonna decrease in carpenter first, or the robber curve.
Okay, so for sure this one's going
Down.
down, right? So the payoff to committing the crime goes down. What happens here?
Goes up.
Both those might increase, so we stop being a burglar and then we kind of filter into that. So those are the trade-offs that we might face here. So we increase the penalty, and that causes our payoff to drop dramatically here. And so what do? Well, this one's still the same, and this one looks kind of appealing. So it's kind of like what we did with the growth of the city and the shrinking city, is that in equilibrium, we get back to having payoffs across the board where we're just at that equilibrium point, and we'd end up having more robbers. So that's the one catch, is that being hard on one might push people into another area. And that might be a good trade, though, is what the point is here. If burglary has a higher victim cost than robbery, then that's an okay trade to make. If I'm getting rid of 6 burglars, picking up 2 robbers, what trade-off is that? Gaining 2 robbers, losing 6 burglars.
It's like a net lawful gain.
It's what's the trade-off? 3 to 1. Jonathan?
I still just hate the fact that it's basically saying I'd rather get robbed than have somebody burgle my house.
Well, and that's where we have to fall back, yeah, but that's where we fall back on the data in terms of the victim cost. And so that did take into account personal stuff as well. But yeah, that's right. That's the trade-offs. But this is the reality of it. And by using the victim cost information, maybe we can try to make better choices. All right, well, let's do a little warmer upper. We got about 10 minutes left. Let's see what these problems look like for this one. So let's turn to number 2. This is chapter 23 again. So number 2, loss aversion and lottery probabilities. Consider a worker who experiences loss aversion at the 1 to 2, like we did earlier. In other words, the pain from a loss is 2 times the pleasure from a gain. The crime of the lottery is 30 and negative 30 with R1 and R2. The expected utility of the lottery will be 0 if R1 and R2 equal what? So try to put that down. You're using that same model. But now you got to remember what goes where. I'm just going to kind of redraw a little bit of what we've been working on with the model. Yep, just, and yeah, illustrate, so draw a picture. I drew a picture of the one we've been working on. So I just basically did this here. So illustrate. Anybody get any answers? What'd you get? 0.5. So if R1 is 0.5, what's R2?
0.5.
0.5, yeah. So remember with our probabilities, they have to sum to 1. So with this one, you can drive the expected utility to 0. Is one way to kind of do it. Is that what you did? Or how did you solve the R1?
0.5 times 30 plus 0.5 times negative 30 is 15 and negative 15.
So is it okay to just solve it here? Is it okay, so if I'm hearing you right, so R1 equals 1 minus R2, right, with probabilities. So if my expected payoff, did you set this equal to 0? Or did you do something different? Or did you just kind of plug and chug?
Plug and chug.
So you did this one though. If you plugged and chugged this, you didn't do an expected utility. This is the expected payoff.
Yeah, you did the payoff.
You just did the payoff. So we can do that, that's fine. We can say, well, what's the expected payoff? Where will that equal 0? So it's where R1, which is R1 times 30 plus R2, which can be 1 minus R1 times negative 30. Where does that equal 0? So that'd be one way to do it. You can also probably with this one kind of think through, oh, what is the number that makes it equal? But this would be kind of the fancier mathematical way to do it. So 30R plus a minus 30R. Let's see, we'll just do, minus 30R plus minus 30R, whatever, plus 30, oh wait, that's why I did that wrong. I don't want the R in there. I'm bringing this 30 into it. So a minus 30 and then plus 30R equals 0. So 60R equals 30. R equals 30 over 60. And this is actually R1. I just kind of dropped the 1. And then R1 being 0.5 means R2 is 0.5. But that doesn't quite, the expected utility of the lottery will be 0. So is it correct to drive that one to 0? So what's going on with this picture? What goes on here?
Nothing. No choice.
What's the payoff?
0.
0. So you're just bringing it down to 0. So it is true that the expected utility is 0 when the payoff's 0. So that one worked out, right? So that one worked out at 0, doing it the way you did it. Okay. Questions on that? How about number 4? Let's see if we can just at least get a start on this one. During the 1970s, the crime rate for women increased 5 times faster than the crime rate for men. Suppose that Betty, with a G equal 3 and an L equals 6, so that's our 2 for 1, right? The gain and the loss. In 1970, Betty's crime lottery is 120, negative 15, 1/3 and 2/3. In the 1970s, Betty's rational choice is crime if her lawful wage is what? So see if you can put this one out there. There's our probabilities. You're pretty much just working the model. And then the rational crime is going to be relative to the certainty equivalent. As soon as you get an answer, shout it out. I don't have the answer to this one, so we're just gonna compare your guys' notes.
I got 30 for Eric.
I have 32.
32. You had 30, Lawson?
I had
30. We got a second vote for 30. And Kalen says 30. Jameson says 30. All right. So we got $30 for the certainty equivalent. Suppose the physical fitness of women improves between 1970 and 1980. A plausible new value for R1 is a quarter or a half. Betty's rational choice to commit a crime if her lawful wage is less than what? So a fourth or a half, what do you think would be most reasonable for R1?
A half.
Half why?
That's like the.
She's got a better chance of getting away with it.
Better chance of getting away with it, right? So that's kind of, the way that we can kind of think through some of these stuff. So some of the other problems we'll work on, addressing penalties versus benefits. And we'll see you Monday. So that's due Sunday night.